the Planning Commission meeting for the City of Sherwood, October 26, 2021. And we'll take a roll call. Chair Simpson here. Vice Chair Kai.
Here.
Commissioner Widola.
Present.
Commissioner Giles.
Here.
Commissioner Bantz.
Here.
And Commissioner Brown is out sick. So we will move on to our consent agenda, which consists of the approval of the October 12th Planning Commission work session and regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
All motion. I motion to approve the consent agenda.
All right.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. Roll call vote. Commissioner Bantz.
Aye.
Commissioner Giles.
Yes.
Commissioner Widola.
Aye.
Vice Chair Kai.
Aye.
And Chair Simpson, yes. All right, next is an introduction of our new city manager, Keith Campbell. Greetings. I think you're muted.
Good start. Good start.
That's a great way to introduce myself. I forget to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Keith Campbell, the new city manager. I appreciate the opportunity. Don't have much to say or to talk about, but just wanted to come to, as I get acclimated with the community, I want to start meeting people, want to start coming to boards and commission meetings so I can start to see the people that are involved in the community so they can see me. And so I hope someday we can do it in person, but for now, happy to be here and to introduce myself and to watch the meeting silently from the background, muted so that I don't interrupt.
Well, we have 3 very, very important hearings this evening, so you'll hear some lively discussion, I think, this evening. So thank you for attending and welcome to the City of Sherwood.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, council liaison announcements. Councilor Scott.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Not a whole lot to talk about tonight. We did have a council meeting last Tuesday. There was a minor ordinance that was adopted where we are now going to be requiring commercial landlords to provide information up front to potential tenants around land use, really. So basically, if a tenant wants to rent a space in the city and the landlord has to give them information that says, hey, you probably want to go consult with the city because your intended use may not be permitted, may not be zoned. You may have to go through these processes that can potentially cost a lot of money. And then it kind of puts the onus on the tenant at that point to avail themselves of those resources. So at this point, the legislation is just a notice requirement. So the landlord has to provide notice to the tenant of their, I wouldn't say rights, but of that they should really, it's really an advisement, right? And it's a forum that the city develops. So the potential landlord gives that to the tenant and says, you really should, the city strongly recommends you should do this due diligence before you sign a lease. So that was passed, or was it the first reading? I don't know. Did we pass that? I don't know.
It was the second reading.
That was, okay, that's what I thought. We did pass it. Yeah, so that passed. Thank you. And then next council meeting next week, we will have on the 2nd, we will have potentially multiple public hearings. Any of the items that may pass through this commission tonight will have their first reading at city council next week. And of the three that you're hearing on tonight, as well as we have some work to do on solid waste and water fee schedules next week. So it's that time of year where we have to review and potentially adjust rates for those 2 things. So that's it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the update. And that landlord piece of legislation is so logical. It's a responsibility of a tenant who might not ever have the understanding of the process. So I appreciate the city stepping in for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff announcements. Erica, you have announcements?
I do. Good evening, Commission. So I have 2 quick announcements for you this evening. We have a Sherwood West Community Advisory Committee meeting coming up on November 3rd from 5:30 to 7:30. Packets will be going out tomorrow, and the website will be updated with that information if you're interested in looking over that information. We also have a scheduled Planning Commission meeting on November 9th, and we have 2 hearings scheduled that evening, in addition to our annual SWOT analysis for the commission. And so that's our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And council likes to review that information as they set their work programs for the 2022 new year that's quickly approaching.
Is that it?
That is it.
No other exciting news. For the SWOT, will you be sure to include a copy of the last year's
Yes,
analysis in our packet for next time?
I will do that.
And I'm choking right now, so I have a tickle in the back of my throat that I can't keep control of, so I may have to mute during this. So excuse me as I mute and turn off my camera to address that. So next agenda item are community comments, and community comments are limited to those items not already on the agenda. And pursuant to House Bill 4212, citizen comments must be submitted in writing to planning@sherwoodoregon.gov. To be included in the record for this meeting, the email must clearly state either that it is for citizen comment or for a testimony item for a public hearing. The specific public hearing topic for which it is intended in either case must be received. The specific for which it is intended and in either case must be received at least 24 hours in advance of the scheduled meeting time. So Erica, did we receive any citizen comments?
We have not. Not this evening.
All right, so we are going to move on to public hearings. And it will seem redundant, but I will have to read the public hearing script before each of the 3 hearing items this evening. So the first one, the public hearing on LU 2021-19 PA Economic Opportunities Analysis is called to order. To maintain compliance with public meeting laws and pursuant to House Bill 4212, this meeting is being conducted electronically. The public notices for this meeting stated that citizen comments and testimony for this hearing item had to be submitted in writing at least 24 hours in advance in order to be included in the meeting. The public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. Staff will present the staff report. Questions, if any, by the hearing body for staff. We will then open the public hearing for testimony. The time will be limited as follows. Applicant, which is the city, will have 30 minutes split between presentation and rebuttal. As previously noted, public testimony for this hearing was required to be submitted in advance in writing. Staff will read the first 4 minutes of comments received. The full text of the comments has been provided to the hearing body and the applicant in advance of this hearing and will be included in the record. There'll be rebuttal from the applicant, which is the remainder of their 30 minutes. There'll be final comments by staff, questions of staff, if any, by the commission. We will then close the public hearing and no other comments will be heard from the public or the applicant. Then there'll be discussion by the commission. This item is a legislative item, and the Planning Commission's role in this decision is to make a recommendation for action by the City Council. A decision may be made by the Planning Commission at the close of the hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain. If the matter is continued to a date certain, this will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Please note, failure to raise an issue with enough detail to enable the commission, the applicant, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Also, failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues regarding proposed conditions of approval, again with enough detail to allow the commission to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And as this is a legislative matter, ex parte contact, bias or conflict of interest does not factor into our ability to perform our tasks this evening. So we'll move right into planning staff / applicant.
Great. So the applicant tonight is the city. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me here. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Because I can't see any of you.
Yes,
Yes.
we see it in
Okay.
presentation mode.
Great. Do I need to change the mode?
No, it's perfect.
Okay. Okay. So good evening, commissioners. I'm Erica Palmer, planning manager, and tonight before you is the economic opportunities analysis, or what we call the EOA for short. And this is an important document because this is a technical document that is part of our reference documents for the comprehensive plan. So we need to have an adopted EOA as part of the city's comp plan efforts. So tonight, our purpose is to review the draft EOA, to look over the state requirements and what those are. We'll go over our buildable lands inventory, some key findings and the conclusions that came out of the EOA document itself. And ultimately, the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to council to either approve with modifications, or to deny the adoption of the EOA. So the EOA, it's based on state land use goal 9, which is economic development, and state land use goal 9 tells cities around the state that we need to provide opportunities for economic activities, for the health, welfare, and prosperity of our citizens. So what really this is saying, goal 9 is telling us that we need to provide, job opportunities within our communities. And so why do we do an EOA? Well, first, it's a legal requirement of goal 9. And through this process, we are required to identify the land needs for our employment over the next 20 years. It's very similar to our housing needs analysis, which requires us to look at our housing needs and supply over the 20-year period. So we look at the existing conditions and we forecast future conditions in the EOA. We look at how much employment growth will occur in that 20-year period. And ultimately, will our land supply of employment lands be sufficient enough for that employment growth to occur? We look at our, policies around economic development and what the strategies are. And of course, we identify any land deficiency needs. And the EOA, it really helps us coordinate opportunities as well with agency partners. So this is just a little snapshot. I like to call this is the recipe for the EOA. The first step is we do the inventory of our employment land need and of our employment land, and then we look at the need for the employment land. So that's taking a look at our forecasted growth for future employment. It's a very prescriptive process, the EOA is, and I just want to make that very clear. So our commercial industrial buildable lands inventory. So the methodology for our buildable lands inventory, it started out with using Metro's BLI. Staff, we took that information and we refined it even more. We looked at all the commercial industrial tax lots in the Tonkin and Brookman areas and inventoried those. And we made sure that we classified those lands as either being vacant, potentially redevelopable, and then we also removed land with, various constraints that aren't suitable for building, including our riparian areas, our wetlands, and steep slopes. So here's the BLA map that is in the document itself. And what we get out of all of this information it's telling us that we have actually 249 total unconstrained buildable acres for employment needs in Sherwood. And that table right there on the left kind of breaks down those buildable acres into our land use categories. So our employment growth forecast. So the EOA sets a forecast for employment growth. It shows us how many jobs we could see over the next 20 years. The 2021-2041 employment forecast, it shows a 1.42 average annual growth rate, which equates to roughly around 3,000 additional new jobs in Sherwood over the 20-year planning period. And I just want to say this is just a forecast, it's just the projected rate, and Sherwood, we could grow faster than that forecast. And this would mean that Sherwood would see ultimately more jobs over that 20-year planning period. So what does this mean? So looking at how much growth we're planning for in Sherwood over the 20-year planning period, and for those additional, roughly 3,000 new employees, we took a look at how those employees would be distributed among the land use types, so industrial, retail, commercial, office and commercial services, and government. So this table, table 2, this is showing us our current employment in 2021. So we have roughly about 2,500 employees in our industrial land designations for the city of Sherwood. And that's roughly around 28% of our whole total, what I like to call our whole total pie of employment lands. We have roughly around almost 1,400 employees in the retail commercial, which comes to about 15%. And then office and commercial services, we have about 4,567, which is roughly 50% right now. And then in government, we have 664, which is 7% of our entire employment sector. So projecting this out into 2041, we are projecting that we're going to see a lot more jobs in our industrial zoned lands. And so we have bumped up that total percent of employment. Instead of 28%, we have bumped that up to 34%. So we're definitely going to see more employees within those land use designation areas. For commercial retail, we've toned it down a bit to 12%. Office and commercial is 48%, and government is 6%. So you can kind of see that change there on that right-hand side. So what does that mean? So this means that we're going to have more people in those industrial land use types, which is, probably going to equate to more land and development over time. So with this comes, table 3 that looks at the comparison of capacity of unconstrained, vacant and potentially redevelopable land with the employment demand by use type. So if going back to that table 2, we know that we're going to see more employment industrial growth. So taking that into account, we are now seeing a land deficit of 8 acres within that land use type. Retail commercial, we have 4 acres of land available. Office and commercial services, we see a deficit of 35 acres. And then in our future Tonkin and Brookman areas, we are still seeing, the 127 acres that is there for future growth of employment lands. So this table right here, I just wanted to share with the commission tonight because this table really shows that our economic development goals have been working over the past couple of years. Right now, we don't have any commercial sites larger than 10 acres within city limits for commercial sites. In the 2019 EOA, we had a total of 87 acres on sites between 10 and 50 acres. And today we are showing only 42 acres on sites between 10 and 50 acres. So we are, we are seeing a significant consumption. We've seen a significant consumption of land over the past 2 years, on sites between, 10 and 50 acres within Sherwood, within our industrially zoned areas. And then in Brookman still has 3 sites between 2 and 5 acres as well. So a little bit about our existing economic conditions. Sherwood, our wages are below average for the Portland region and for the nearby cities of Tigard and Tualatin. Sherwood's medium income is well above the comparable cities and the Portland region. And then more people commute out of Sherwood to work than commute to Sherwood to work. And that kind of relates to the first one. So a lot of people are commuting out of Sherwood to work, and a lot of the jobs that we have in Sherwood are, in the service sector that are lower paying wages. But we hope to reverse that trend, and that's what that's part of our economic development goals. So our potential growth in industries in Sherwood include manufacturing, wholesale, professional and business services, and then services for visitors, which includes tourism and wine and hotels, and then services for restaurants that could include medical, financial, and retail and other personal services. So this is what our EOA is showing us for potential growth industries in Sherwood. So conclusions out of our EOA. So so we have a deficit of land now in our industrial area. We need to actually provide additional infrastructure, in the Tonkin employment area to align with our economic development goals to see future economic development growth. We need to provide flexibility in our development code to provide opportunities for growth. And then, of course, we need to be working with our partners to identify opportunities to support existing and future businesses. So with that, I do have some additional changes I want to run by the commission to consider this evening, and that is to update the table of contents within the document. The numbering is a little bit off. And then I would also like to include an Appendix B that lists the goals and policies in the Thriving and Diversified Economy theme from our draft comp plan into this document itself. And then in the summary section on page 5, in the 3rd paragraph, if we could include some language that states with the support of DLCD staff, this update includes the following. Just stating that, DLCD staff did help with this new update of the EOA, and just recognizing their support in this document. And then on the background page on page 1, similar to what we did in the H&A, staff would just like to include some language in regards to COVID-19 and its impact to employment uses, and how that will be further reviewed during the next update of the EOA. Just recognizing that we are in a pandemic, there might be impacts to employment needs, but we don't necessarily know what those impacts will be until we do the next update to the EOA. So staff, we did route this to agencies and departments on September 21st. We included public notice in accordance with our Sherwood zoning and development code. And we haven't received any public comments this evening in regards to this land use application or this application. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments from the commission, and I will just stop my presentation so I can see you all now.
So Erica, thank you very much for including the goals and policies as Appendix B. And when we spoke earlier about that and the COVID-19 comments, I missed adding that we should, in addition to adding it to page 1 on the introduction, in the detail of the document itself, on pages 16 through 20, there's a summary chart of impacts to the economy. And page 21, there are some narratives for national trends, state trends, regional trends. And I think on page 20, where it talks about the national trends, just add the same snippet that you're adding in the summary to tie the whole document together, that even though we're aware that it's happened, we don't have any numbers or any examination of what the impacts would be from COVID. And trying to, okay, Commissioner Widola.
Thank you. Erica, on your presentation on page 9, the numbers you shared from table 2 don't exactly match the numbers that are on Roman numeral page 6 in the packet, or on table 15 on page 61, which I believe is the same table. And so those two tables do match in the packet, but they were different from what you showed. So I was curious, does the packet need to be updated, or is what the presentation outdated? Can you bring up page 9 on your presentation deck?
I will. Hold on 1 second here.
I see what you were talking about, because there were 2 tables.
Yeah, we're talking on table 2. We're just talking about the upper half of table 2.
So
Minor differences.
It's
yes. So you got a redlined version of the EOA, and unfortunately, when you redline a table, it doesn't actually strike it all out and track changes. And so let me go back. I just want to share my screen once again. Let me share this.
Do you have the untrack chained version of the document so we can see the charts as they will be printed?
Yes. And so I'm going to get back to that right now here, because it's definitely in the presentation.
Page 9. Yep.
So this table right here shown on the screen, this is the table that will be in the final EOA. So this shows more of the employment going into our industrial land needs, 34% instead of 32% that was in the 2019 document.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And then
Yep.
my other question is on Appendix B, order of operations. Are we going to be able to, is our language final that will be added, or can we potentially be changing that language and have to come back and change this language?
So whatever the final goals and policies are in the comp plan, we'll just add that to this document as the appendix.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Kai?
Yeah, so I just had 2 things that I was just curious about. On the document, I understand that the document will reference COVID-19, but as far as any data or impacts, is there a reason why none of that will necessarily be included? Were things just studied prior to 2020, as far as having any information or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. So, right now, I don't think there's a lot of information out there, on the impacts of COVID-19 and employment uses. But I think over time, those development trends will start to come out and be studied. So in the next EOA update, we plan on, addressing that fact.
Okay, so it's just too recent still in terms of that, right? Okay. And then the other question I had was, Sherwood West isn't taken into account in this document, correct?
Correct. And it is not taken into account because it's not part of our urban growth boundary
Okay.
at this time, like Brookman or Tonkin. However, we do recognize the fact, in the document itself, that we are kind of running out of particular sites that are, between 10 and, 50 acres
Mm-hmm.
in our industrial, zoned areas. And there is a potential for, to look at Sherwood West to kind of make up for those sites in the future, because site selection is very important, to employers and what their needs are.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of what I figured, was that because like it's always there, but there's no timeline for when it's going to be moved into its next phase. So I imagine that probably has to play into it as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Commissioner Bance?
Yeah, that might have partially answered one of my questions, because looking at table 2, that's where I'm at. And just the growth rate for 20 years seemed kind of low considering that. But if Sherwood West isn't a part of that, that makes sense. But Brookman is, isn't it? That entire concept plan down there, that's an urban growth boundary. Okay.
Yes.
So we're adding, eventually the plan is to add a whole lot of, I think, medium density residential. There's commercial zone land, stuff like that. But we've got retail commercial going up hardly at all in this thing over the next 20 years. And if we're going to zone commercial, some there at all, or even just expand and add housing, it seems like you would end up with more commercial type businesses somewhere in there. So I guess it just seems a little odd that that's not a huge increase. And that's question 1. And then question 2 would be around the government figure, but I think that might have been addressed with the lack of the urban growth boundary component. With this many employees coming in, it just seemed like what you must be suggesting is that we can scale, is that you guys, working within the government or have capacity to kind of absorb what's already coming on. I mean, there is some increase, but not a lot relative to the overall increase. I think the overall increase is like 33% increase in employment, and I think about 10% or so, 10% for government. So you guys can scale is kind of what you're thinking there. So those 2 questions, those are my questions.
Yeah, that's great, Daniel. And I just want to, emphasize too that the fact that we have an EOA now, an EOA, just like the HNA, is a very important planning document and tool that helps us plan for the future. And these documents should ultimately, be looked at and reviewed, and updated, on a at least a 5-year basis. So the numbers in here, the assumptions in the EOA, could change over the next couple of years.
So I have a comment on that too, is that his first comment about the commercial not going up very much, that is a pretty strong statement, and it seems very likely, because the area that we're adding is Brookman, and it's almost all housing that's coming in. The only commercial is a very small node up next to Highway 99, and the Tonkin employment areas has a very small opportunity for commercial, but as part of the industrial. So when I first saw it, it looked disproportionate, but then when we think about what we have, it makes sense knowing that Sherwood West won't be incorporated in this. And correct me if I'm wrong, Erica, but I believe when Sherwood West goes through the UGB process to be incorporated, one of the tasks that we have to do as part of the Sherwood West UGB expansion is update the EOA and the HNA. And so numbers will be updated for these 2 key documents when we go through a UGB expansion process. Is that how it works?
You're correct, Gene.
So is that?
Yeah, that helps. That makes sense thinking about Brookman. So the suggestion is the availability of the land that's there will mean that there won't be too much increased retail, so less employees. Okay. But this analysis takes it the other direction. This analysis is saying there's going to be more employees, so we need to evaluate how much land we have. Which way is it that we're doing this here?
we're going to be adding some commercial land. We anticipate adding some commercial land for some retail aspect to it, but it is in a smaller rate or much reduced rate to our adding industrial land. Or jobs, sorry.
Or jobs. It's really like it's really jobs. It's really
it's jobs.
Yeah, it's jobs.
The amount of land we have is the same, but the amount of land that's going to be used for jobs is going to be disproportionately industrial because that's the vacant land we have.
Okay. It seems kind of odd because we're talking about this is how much increase in employment we're going to have. So do we have enough land for that?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're saying here. But what I just heard is, well, that makes sense that there's only this much employment increase because there's only so much zoning for commercial.
Right.
So, I mean, why aren't they exactly equal then? Why, I mean, if this analysis is just saying, well, the two things have to match, what's the point of the analysis?
I'm missing that point.
So I want to take a step back, Daniel, and especially with table 2, it's really some assumptions that we're making. And the first assumption we're making is that we will see more employment jobs on industrial zoned land, and with that comes more land will be taken out, so we see a deficit of industrial zone land within the city limits. And so with the commercial shrinking just a little bit by a few percentage points, I think we had to make an assumption that we're going to see more industrial employees than commercial retail employees over the 20-year planning period. And I think that's where we're making that assumption and we're justifying